Okay, let's go ahead and get started, everybody. Good morning. Good to see you all. I sent the class an email, I think yesterday. Did everybody get that? Can someone give me a thumbs up or just put your camera on and let me know that you got that regarding the review? All good. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Mackenzie. Okay, so I just wanted to check that has gone out. So the plan is, and of course it's a little different here doing it over a summer session where everything seems so concentrated, right? And things come at you pretty quickly. That, normally in an in-person class, I would have, 2 days between classes or a weekend between putting a review out and an exam. So we don't quite have that luxury here. So the plan is, I want to pick up where we left off with context and then go through fossil fuels. And I don't have any doubt that we'll be able to finish that today. At the end of today, I will, at the end of this morning's lecture, I'll talk a little bit about the review, the study guide that I sent out. And tomorrow we will probably do nuclear and then some of renewables. So I know it's pretty short notice, but I will only know by tomorrow where we are in terms of what I would like to cover in the exam regarding renewables. I'm not, to be totally honest with you, I'm not that concerned about just cramming everything in just because it's on the syllabus and, by golly, we have to, have energy done by tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Not at all. But I want to make sure I give you, a good 24 hours, obviously, to read through and prepare any last minute material that might be included given tomorrow's lectures. So that's the plan. So I will get to that review that I handed out. And then just incidentally, I just posted up under content fossil fuels, what I think is an interesting read. It's relevant to what we're going to cover today. And it's something that's going on in the Arctic surrounding the Trans-Alaskan pipeline. It's kind of an interesting read, and I'll refer back to that when we get into the material this morning. So that's more of a kind of FYI on what I posted under there. Hope you're able to get to that. Okay, so to finish off this kind of broader look or this contextualization of energy before we get to the nuts and bolts of fossil fuels, let's just stop for a minute here and look at electricity, right? I said I'd make that distinction early on, the clear distinction between global energy consumption or energy demands, production, however you want to phrase it, and electricity, right? So when I said that 85% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, that included about a third coming from oil for transportation fuels. So here, let's just look at the delivery of electricity. So this is global electricity consumption. This is according to the International Energy Association by technology in 2019, right? So clearly, when it comes to the delivery of electricity globally, about half, 51%, comes from natural gas and coal, a combination of those two fossil fuels, right? A decade ago, those two would have been flipped, right? Globally, coal would have been a bigger player than natural gas. And so we're going to look at these individual generation technologies in just a moment. So this is just context. Nuclear is about 18%, hydro about 14%, wind 8%, solar 3%, and other that includes things like geothermal and biomass. Biofuels account for about 6%. So I don't know if that distribution surprises you or not, whether you would have expected that, but that's the global picture, right? Now, each country, of course, has a very different distribution than this generalization and this summary suggests. And when we look at the United States, which is really just what I want to finish off this context this morning, there's a couple of ways of which I want to do this. So this is just a repeat of the diagram that's in the text. It was my way of looking at how electricity is delivered in the United States. So the top left of this is the US from 2004 to 2018. And then I'm actually going to update these with some slides in just a minute which I think is another interesting way of looking at things. But this is a broad general take-home, right? So you can see in 2004, okay, when we just look at coal, in the US, coal supplied about 50% of all of our electricity, okay? Now in 2018, or at least in 2018, it was down to 30%, right? So right off the bat, and I know this may come across as a political comment, and I don't mean it to be, right? This is more of an energy comment, I suppose. That when you hear politicians say things like make coal great again, not going to happen, right? It is simply a technology that is on the way out, okay? It is not going to happen. There's no political movement that can put coal back on the map, at least in the United States, right? Because it's being driven by the market. It's being driven by the economics, and to some extent, the environmental footprint of these technologies. So when you see here over this 14-year period, the decline in coal, look at natural gas. In the US in 2004, natural gas accounted for about 16% of our electricity. Now it's up to about 30%, and in fact is continuing to climb, right? So that's the take home, that's one take home, at least in the United States, okay, that we've seen this dramatic flip from coal to natural gas being the dominant supplier of electricity. Nuclear, you can see, is essentially flat, right? Hydro is essentially flat, but the other big change comes in the growth in renewables from about 3% in 2004 to about 10% currently, right? Does that make sense? I don't know, please jump in if you have any comments or questions on that. So that's the picture in the US, okay? Let me show you another way to look at this. And these states, this is just for reference. I'm gonna come back and show a couple of different states in a different way in just a moment here. So that's 2018, right? Let's update this to 2019. And I thought this was a really cool way of displaying this. This is a set of diagrams that come out of the New York Times. Let me just go back a second so you know where I'm coming from here. So here we are is the United States in 2018. I said 30% was coal, 32% was natural gas. This is updated through 2019, right? And let me just spend a minute here so you can get your heads around how this is being displayed. So now we're going back here to 2001 on the left here, and here is 2019. And the way in which these diagrams have been produced, it shows the percentage of power produced from each source, okay? Just like the previous diagram. And it shows this over time. So for example, in 2001, 51% of the US got electricity from coal, right? Now, as in the previous diagram, I said it's 30. At the end of 2019, that has dropped to 23%, okay? So just in that last year, between 2018 and 2019, we saw about another 7% drop in coal supplying electricity to the US. It's absolutely remarkable how this change has come about. Now, don't be put off by this part of the diagram over here, everybody, or this one over here. This doesn't imply that in 2005 or 2016, there was this gigantic tsunami and shift. It's just the way in which it's plotted. All this simply suggests right here, when they flip over, this is the period where the one technology becomes more important than the other, at least in terms of the delivery of electricity. So as of the end of 2019, we don't have the 2020 numbers out yet, by the way. Natural gas is the dominant supplier of electricity in the US, 38%. Coal is 23%, nuclear is 19%, that's still pretty flat, right? Hydroelectric is pretty flat. This actually breaks renewables down into wind, 7%, and solar, about 3%, something like that, okay? So that's the US as a whole. Now, I don't know if that surprises you or not. Any questions on that? Does this representation make sense to you in terms of how how electricity in the US is generated? Oh, good.
Maybe wind power is a little lower than I expected. Okay,
so, just expand upon that, Jet. What what did you think? What was your kind of?
Oh, well, I've been to like Sugar Land, Texas, and they have just hundreds of windmills everywhere.
Right.
And I know they have them in the ocean too. So I was just expecting it to be a little higher than 6%.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the US as a whole, right? Okay. Let's look at some individual states and see if this changes your perception. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a reasonable comment. Okay. I'm just going to pull out a couple of states. And then what I'll do, everybody, on the website, I'll put the link to these diagrams to this website where you can actually go and pick any particular state that you're interested in, right? But these are ones that I think are for me, really interesting. So look at Pennsylvania, right? Pennsylvania in 2001, 57% of Pennsylvania's electricity came from coal. At the end of 2019, that was 17, okay? That's pretty extraordinary, from half to less than 20%. Natural gas was almost non-existent in Pennsylvania. Now it accounts for 42% of its electricity, and that's largely because of hydraulic fracturing in the Marcellus Shale. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get into this in a bit more detail, okay? Look at nuclear. Nuclear is about flat, right? Even though nuclear looks like it's jumping all over the place, that percentage is about the same, right? 37 to 36%, with renewables down at the bottom. So Pennsylvania is dominated by fossil fuels and a big chunk of nuclear. Okay, Jet, check this out. Here's Iowa, right? Iowa, coal has gone from 85% to 35%, and look at wind. Wind now accounts for 42% of the electricity in Iowa. So Jet, I don't know if that changes your maybe perception. I know you refer to Texas here and being in Sugar Land, right?
Yeah, it changes my perception a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, right? When we think now, Iowans, I don't know if anybody in the class is from Iowa, but Iowans have lived with wind for a very long time, okay? It's been a technology around for 2+ decades. Okay? Natural gas, you can see nuclear, and a little bit of hydro. So there's wind power in Iowa. Let's look at another couple here. Here's Nevada, right? Sunny old Nevada. Nevada has wiped out its coal industry. 52% in 2001. It now accounts for 7% of electricity, right? My suggestion to you is if you want to invest in coal, you probably shouldn't, because it is a technology in the US that is on the way out, right? So solar is growing fast in Nevada, as you would expect, right? You can see solar is essentially non-existent 2 decades ago. Now it accounts for 14% of the electricity in Nevada. Natural gas dominates there as well, okay? Just a couple others here. California, there might be some Californians in the audience here, right? California, natural gas is actually declining largely at the expense of solar, okay? Just look how solar has expanded in California, 20% of its electricity. Hydro has grown a little bit. Nuclear is on the way down as they've shut down a couple of plants. And wind in California, and I don't know how your perceptions are, I think most people think of California as being the leader in wind in the United States. It is not. It started off that way, because that's where most of the smaller scale wind farms really started out in the 1980s. But wind currently in California accounts for about 7% of energy. And then finally, given the fact that we're sitting in Texas, this will be the last one, let's take a look at the great state of Texas. So here's how we generate electricity, right? Natural gas has been pretty standardly flat across the last 2 decades because hydraulic fracturing was developed here under our feet in the Barnett Shale, and natural gas has been a big player. But look at coal, 36% in 2001, 19%, right? Coal is now being phased out in Texas. And again, Jet, just coming back to your point here, look at wind. Less than 1% in 2001. It now in 2019 accounted for 17%. In 2020, it accounted for just over 20% of our wind in Texas, right? Solar is lagging here, but growing quickly. My guess is in the next 10 years, solar will be at least 10% of our portfolio. So my point here, everybody, is a couple of things. One is the way in which electricity is delivered, okay, the generation of electricity is obviously very much dependent on the geography of the area, right? And I'll kind of expand upon that, especially when we look at renewables. if you want to put a wind farm in, you probably don't want to go to Georgia where the wind doesn't blow very much relative to West Texas or Iowa, for example, right? So the geography dictates, you know, what types of generation technology you're going to use. Okay? And then the other thing, of course, is that those general averages that we start out with, right? The US generating 38% from natural gas and 23% from coal, that varies tremendously depending on where you are. So let me stop there and see if there are any thoughts or comments about how we get our electricity in the US. Because this type of diagram, whether you're looking at the US as a whole or individual states, has a very important environmental, let alone socioeconomic footprint. There's a rich environmental footprint associated with the way in which we get electricity. Does that still surprise you, Jet, 17%? Or are you feeling a bit more comfortable about your Sugarland wind turbines now?
No, 17 is pretty good. I'd say that's like, yeah, that's better than I was expecting.
Yeah. I
thought it'd be hovering around like 10%.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally reasonable preconceived idea at about 10% now. So this is these are annual averages. The other comment to make here, everybody, is that because a technology like wind is non-dispatchable, right? It's intermittent. The reality is there are periods where we get a much larger proportion of our electricity from wind, right? So in 2020, there was one day in November where we got almost 50% of our electricity in one day from wind in Texas alone. So I hope, you know, as we unpack the environmental impacts of electricity here, or of energy, I hope that this at least kind of dispels to some extent this myth that, you know, technologies like wind and solar are just really sort of niche, small, insignificant components of an electric grid. They simply are not. If we took wind off the grid in Texas right now, if we just suddenly shut down all our wind turbines, something would have to give, right? You would either have to dramatically ramp up natural gas, bring back more coal-fired power plants, or do something with nuclear or solar very, very quickly, right? So there's an evolution to the deployment of these technologies, if that makes sense. All right, so there's some general context, okay? What I want to do now is look at the big three. Let's look at fossil fuels. And as I said at the outset, let's look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Of all these technologies, just some key issues that we face, not just here in the US, but also globally. So the question with coal is, I suppose this: can we realistically abandon coal as a source of electricity / energy over the next 2 to 3 decades, right? I think I've made the comment that a lot of the discussion around energy and the environment, and electricity and the environment, but let's just keep it energy for the moment. A lot of that discussion focuses on decarbonizing our future, right? Moving away from fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. And a lot of that rationale comes from a climate perspective, right? That we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, not just economically from becoming independent of places like the Middle East, but environmentally, so that we can produce less carbon and not impact the climate, right? Reduce our impacts on climate change. And that's a link we're going to make, obviously, later on next week in this course. So can we realistically abandon coal? So that's the question I want to look at. And then I want to talk just very briefly about some of the environmental impacts here of coal. So coal, of course, powers the Industrial Revolution, right? Prior to 1840, 1850, most of the world's energy comes from biomass, from burning wood. And as the Industrial Revolution takes off, we start seeing that dramatic flip where coal-fired power plants, the internal combustion engine, and that drives the Industrial Revolution and drives global development. In many parts of the world, burning of wood, the combustion of biomass, is still a very important part of the energy portfolio, right? remember that diagram, that conceptual diagram I showed you of, 2 billion people getting their electricity or getting their energy needs from burning wood, and they live on less than $2 a day. So this doesn't mean to say that biomass is completely out of the picture. It just simply means that coal is the technology that drives the Industrial Revolution. Now, coal, of course, just kind of intro to Geology 101 for just literally a minute here. Coal is just simply the transformation of prehistoric vegetation, right? So we have prehistoric vegetation that dies, decomposes, and then gets buried by sediments and gets subjected to heat and pressure over time. And the organic material changes from vegetation into peat and into various grades of coal. So when we think about these various grades of coal, this is kind of my way of trying to summarize this. So as we move from the top left in this diagram down towards the bottom right here, you increase the quality of the coal. What that simply means, everybody, is that once vegetation gets transformed into peat, right, the water contents are very high. The volatile contents are very high. In other words, when you start burning things like peat and lignite, those are very polluting, okay? But as you move from left to right here, coal gets transformed into peat. Then as you increase pressure and time, it changes into lignite. If you keep increasing pressure and time, it changes into bituminous coal. And then eventually, given enough time, that those organics get transformed into anthracite, right? So poor quality coal is anything that we consider lignite, right? Lignite has high volatiles. So these are dirty coals, if you like, right? Very high sulfur contents, high mercury contents. Subbituminous coal gets a little quote unquote cleaner, okay? It has a higher carbon content, lower water and lower volatiles. Anthracite coal is, quote, I suppose, quote unquote, the cleanest form of coal, right? It has the highest carbon content. In other words, you get the highest burn when you burn anthracite. So I don't know if that's news to you, but there are different grades of coal. Now, just incidentally, here's a term that you will see thrown about the media, and that is clean coal. Right? Has anybody heard that term, clean coal technologies? What does that term mean, do you think, when you hear that? What does clean coal conjure up in your minds when you hear that term, if anything?
I just think of just less CO2 emissions.
Okay.
I think it has to do something with like how it's processed, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe like the safest one.
The safest, yeah, I think all of those are fair comments, everybody. So clean coal depends on who you talk to, right? If you talk to the environmental lobby, they'll say that's an oxymoron, that there simply isn't such a thing as clean coal, right? Coal pollutes, period. And so from an environmental perspective, there would be an argument that there just simply is no such thing. There's no doubt, right? There's cleaner coal, and anthracite is much cleaner than peat, and you're all right in terms of your assertions there. Anthracite generates less mercury, it generates less carbon dioxide when you burn it. It produces greater energy per pound as you burn it because it's got a higher carbon content. So there are cleaner coals, but clean coal and clean coal technology generally refers to burning coal and then removing those volatiles before those pollutants ever make it into the environment. Okay, and a large part of that is built around the technology, what we call CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, right? So that's burning coal, and before that, those pollutants, that smoke ever makes it out into the environment, capturing that carbon, so carbon capture, and then sequestering it, storing it, returning it to the subsurface, pumping it back into the ground. We can talk about that and whether that is economically viable or not, but I just wanted to mention that because you'll see that thrown around quite a bit. Okay. So this is a map here of the coal deposits, the recoverable reserves. So let me use that term correctly, I suppose, as we talked about. So these are coal reserves in the United States. Just focus here on a second on the scale. So these very light blues are lignite, right? So that's the poorest quality coal. Then you've got the darker blues, which are the bituminous coal. And this is subdivided into what we call subbituminous, which are dirtier than bituminous, which are cleaner. And then we've got the cleanest coal, which is anthracite, right? The lowest volatiles and the highest carbon content. So when you look at the distribution of coal deposits across the US, there's a few things that jump out here. One, the anthracite deposits are the exception rather than the rule, okay? So anthracite as the highest quality, subject to the greatest pressure and time, there's much less anthracite than anything else, right? Two, the vast majority of the coal deposits in the United States are bituminous and subbituminous, okay? And three, there are still large lignite deposits, even here in Texas. So when we look at Texas here, okay, these old lignite deposits, when you look at the coal-fired power plants in Texas, where are most of the coal-fired power plants in Texas? They're along this line from essentially Waco, which is southwest of Waco, towards the northeast, right, up towards Tyler, okay? This is where the majority of the coal-fired power plants are, and there's no coincidence that that is where the majority of the lignite deposits are, okay? Incidentally, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I often travel down to College Station. My wife's family lived down near College Station, okay? And I have yet to make a trip to College Station, and we go probably every month or so, a couple of months, without seeing 120, 150 cabs on a coal train. And almost all of that is coming from the Powder River Basin here in Wyoming, right? Subbituminous coal that is being mined and transported into the coal-fired power plants of Texas. So that's the map, right? Any thoughts, any comments? Let me just make one quick one. For me, the take home on this is that coal is, the deposits of coal in the United States are widespread and extensive, right? We are not running out of coal anytime soon in the US or anytime anywhere else. There's plenty of it. I guess that's one point I just wanted to make and leave you with on this map. All good.
Well, I think it's really interesting how like the coal follows like almost the Appalachian Trail on the east.
Right. And that's an interesting observation, Mary. So, and that's just the geology, right? That's how the sedimentary deposits were laid down. Okay, so this is just purely a reflection of the depositional environment in which the prehistoric vegetation is, and then how that is transformed over time by the geology, right? By sediments lying down and subjecting that to greater pressure. Yep. Absolutely. Any other thoughts on the map of US coal? Okay, so yeah, so coal has gone from 50% to 30% in the US, but we're not running out of it anytime soon, okay? So let's just talk a little bit about the environmental impact or the environmental aspect of coal here for a second, right? In the US, 1/3 of our coal is recoverable by this technology, right? So this is strip mining or surface mining. And if you are an owner of a coal mine or a mineral deposit, this is what you want because it is the cheapest way to get at the coal seam, right? Strip mining is where the coal deposit is near the surface, you know, probably within 30 to 50 feet of the surface. And all you have to do is scrape off the surface material. It's called overburden. So that's all the soil and sediments and stuff lying on top of the coal seam. And you can get at the coal seam more easily. And then you begin to mine it through the strip mining, right? These surface mining operations. So from an economic perspective, that's what you want, as opposed to having to drill down vertically into a subsurface seam and then begin to bring that back up to the surface, okay? In other parts of the US, they've come up with this rather unique way of getting at the coal. And this is called mountaintop removal. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this or have any experience of this. I'd never seen it until I took a flight to Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And I was flying over West Virginia. And this, I didn't take this photograph. This is not my picture. But I saw something very similar, right? So mountaintop removal is when the coal seam, and you can sort of see that here. I'll just change colors. In the center, you can see these dark patches. The coal seams are fairly close to the surface. And so what they do is they just remove the mountaintop. It's exactly what it means. And you can see one in the distance over here and another one over the left here, right? You blast away the mountaintop and get at the coal seam and then extract that coal. This has been enormously damaging to the environment. I don't think anyone would argue that unless you are in the coal industry. One, it looks ugly, right? I don't think anyone would say this is an especially beautiful landscape. But a lot of the loose material and the mine tailings themselves end up running down into rivers and waterways. And there's been a lot of work and ample evidence, easy to monitor and detect, a lot of work that's shown the contamination of watercourses in places like Tennessee from mines, right? Not just metal mines like copper, but also coal mines. All of that sludge leaches out into the environment and causes all sorts of environmental issues. So that's just as an aside, it was another way of getting at the coal seam. Please don't go and learn these statistics and try and memorize them. And again, before we end this morning, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about what my expectations are from an exam. But your typical coal-fired power plant. So a typical coal-fired power plant is on the size of 500 megawatts, right? Let me just stop there for a second and just talk about units of energy, because this will become important later on when we talk about renewables, okay? So actually, now's a good opportunity to do this. I wasn't planning on doing this, but let me just do this for a second. Let me talk briefly. I've got a little box in the book there that talks about power and energy, okay? There's a difference between power and energy, and I think it's quite useful here right at this juncture just to mention this, and then we'll move on. And then I'm going to, because I think it's really important when we're looking at the discussion of electricity and energy to be on a level playing field in terms of how much energy can a coal-fired power plant deliver versus a wind turbine or a solar power plant, okay? So here's the quick example. Let's say, I'm looking straight up here. Let's say above my head is a light bulb that is rated at 60 watts, right? So all of you somewhere, unless you're sitting in the dark napping, probably have a light on, right? That light bulb has a power rating. Yep. Let's say the one above my head is 60 watts. That is the instantaneous delivery, right? How much energy is being delivered instantaneously? We call that power, if that makes sense, right? So the power that can be generated by this light bulb is 60 watts. If I flick the switch and the light's on, it's delivering the power at 60 watts. If I turn the switch off, there's no power being delivered, right? So that light bulb has a rating of 60 watts. If I leave it on for 10 hours, okay? If I just leave this light on for 10 hours, right? 60 times 10 is 600. It is 600 watt. It is 600 watt hours of energy, not power, but energy, okay? So the light bulb has a rating of 60 watts. That's the instantaneous delivery of energy. So we call that power. So power is the instantaneous delivery of energy. Energy is the amount of power consumed over a period of time. Okay, I want you all to be absolutely clear on that and happy with that. So when you pay your utility bills, right, you are paying your utility bills based on a rate of how many cents per kilowatt hours of energy are you consuming, right? If you don't have the lights on, you're not consuming any energy. If your 60 watt light bulb is on for 10 hours, you're consuming 600 watt hours of energy, right? And there's 1,000 watts in a kilowatt and 1,000 kilowatts in a megawatt and 1,000 megawatts in a gigawatt and so on. Okay. All right. Questions, anybody? Please don't feel shy if that didn't make sense, because we're going to come back and use that in a little calculation when it comes to energy. So a typical coal-fired power plant is about, as I said, is about 500 megawatts. That can deliver about 500 megawatts of energy if it's on operating 24/7 all the time, okay? The problem is here from an environmental perspective, okay? Now there's lots of different environmental impacts of coal, and let me just mention these and sort of show you where I'm going to tie these in. So a typical coal-fired power plant will produce about 10,000 tons of SO2, right? So SO2 is a byproduct. Sulfur dioxide, okay? That's a pollutant that is in coal, right? That's a volatile in coal. Sulfur dioxide in and of itself is a pollutant, but it's also a constituent of acid rain. We're going to talk briefly about that. A typical coal-fired power plant will produce about the same amount of NO2, right? Nitrogen dioxide. That's another major constituent of acid rain and other aspects of pollution. This is a big one, okay? A typical coal-fired power plant will produce 3 to 4 million tons of CO2. Someone talk to me about CO2. Why do we get so concerned about CO2?
It hurts the air quality.
How so, Claire?
The emission of the gas, like I read that it might cause respiratory issues and stuff like that.
Okay. Carbon dioxide.
Doesn't it cut a hole in the ozone layer?
Okay, I'm just going to make a couple. Okay, so I'm just going to make a couple of little hand notes. Yes, I know to come back. So respiration, ozone. Anybody else on CO2? Why are we so concerned about CO2 and coal-fired power plants?
Isn't it like what causes like climate change, essentially, like global warming?
Okay, climate change and global warming. Yep. You have a look at that. Yep. Okay. Good. Yeah. So CO2 is well, let me ask you this then. Is CO2 a pollutant? Oh, there's a nice exam question.
I mean, we naturally produce CO2.
How?
By breathing out.
There you go. Yeah. Right? So it's pretty hard to avoid if you believe in photosynthesis and the whole kind of breathing in, breathing out thing, Jet. Absolutely. So is CO2 a pollutant? No, it's not. Okay. In and of itself, it is not a pollutant. And as you'll see when we get to chapter 4 and we start talking about air quality, it is not a pollutant as identified by the EPA. In other words, the EPA doesn't mandate certain levels of CO2 from a health perspective, right? So why should we be so concerned about CO2? Well, I think it was Mary who just said a minute ago, CO2 is intimately tied up within the topic of climate change, right? CO2 is a greenhouse gas, a GHG. It's a greenhouse gas. What do we mean by that? Anybody know what we mean by greenhouse gas? What does that typically mean?
Does that just mean gas that's released from natural resources?
No, but I know why you said that, right? Because CO2 is released from released naturally, and it's also released through the combustion of fossil fuel. But that term greenhouse gas refers to something very specific.
It like gets trapped in our atmosphere, and like a greenhouse, it like stays within the atmosphere and like warms up the environment.
Okay. Okay. That's not bad, right? I'm glad you used the term trap. We're going to come back and talk specifically about greenhouse gases. We're going to talk a little bit about that in chapters 4 and 5, but this is going to be the big focus of chapter 6. Why? Because chapter 6 deals with climate change, right? So just for the moment, just take this and then let's just park it. So a greenhouse gas is a gas in the atmosphere that will absorb energy given off by the earth, okay? And anything that absorbs energy warms up its surrounding environment, right? So a greenhouse gas, a gas like carbon dioxide, absorbs energy given off by the earth and therefore leads to an increase in global temperatures. Now, let me also just say before we move on here that that is a natural effect that we absolutely have to have on this planet, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And again, I'll explain that all in detail when we get to chapter 6. But for now, just let's take CO2 as a greenhouse gas, meaning it keeps our planet warm, right? And the issue with CO2 as it pertains to coal is that as we continue to burn coal, we are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And thereby, we are turning up the global thermostat. So that's why CO2, it's not an environmental discussion from a pollutant perspective, even though that does play out for other things like acid rain, but CO2 is a discussion really focused on the climate, on changing global climates. Again, all to be revealed a little later. And then just finally here, a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Comes out of coal. You've got carbon monoxide, ash, arsenic, mercury, and a whole range of things. So for me, this is just my opinion, but I think this kind of holds true for the vast majority of the environmental lobby. Coal is by far and away the most damaging source of energy, of electricity, because of all the atmospheric byproducts that come out of it, right? All of these things like sulfur dioxide, mercury, nitrogen dioxide, let alone CO2, which deals with climate, but a whole host of pollutants that are very hard to deal with, okay? So that's my 2 cents. The challenge globally, even here in the US for a while, but certainly globally, is that coal is here to stay, and it's here to stay for decades to come. And that's one of the great environmental challenges, right? It's here for quite a while. Why is it here for quite a while? Well, take a look at this, okay? Guys, this is a really cool website. I encourage you to go and look at this in your own time. It's called Carbon Brief, okay? And it's a really neat website. And so I've just taken 3 countries here, right? I hope this shows up on your screen to illustrate this point. So we've got the US, India, and China. And this is data as from 2019, okay, right at the end of 2019. So just look at the top left for a second here, everybody. So the 3 colors here are, this is the megawatts of coal that is currently operating. In other words, in the United States, as at the end of 2019, there was 175,000 megawatts, okay, of operational coal, right? In China, that number was almost 1 million. And India, 228,000 megawatts of coal operating. Under construction in the United States, 0. Planned, 0. China, under construction, almost 100,000 megawatts. Planned, another 100,000 megawatts. In other words, in China, there is more under construction and being planned than currently operating in the United States, right? India, same deal, about 70,000 plus megawatts planned or under construction, let alone what China is doing in terms of building coal-fired power plants outside of their own country, right? So this is what fuels the growth in the Chinese economy, right? That there is the growth of coal in China, okay? Look at the United States, everybody. There's the decline, right? Remember, we started in 2004 and said coal was about 50% of US electricity. Now it's something like 30, right? So some countries, like the US, coal is on the way out. Others, like these bottom two, India and China, coal is here to stay for a considerable period of time, right? And that's an enormous challenge environmentally. Okay? At one point, China was building one coal-fired power plant every week. Now they've slowed down, and really interestingly, as I think I've already mentioned, the president of China, President Xi, a few months ago came out and said that China will become net zero, carbon neutral by 2060. Okay? The only way they can do that is dramatically change this picture that you're seeing here in the bottom, right? Is to do something about this new construction and to begin to put that on pause or even cancel some of these coal-fired power plants. And in fact, that is happening and underway, right? So I think you've probably all heard about air quality and the impacts of coal on air quality, things like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, all of those particulates and pollutants. I don't want to say much about air quality here, everyone, because we're going to come back and deal with air quality as an entire topic in chapter 4. But clearly, as we're talking about fossil fuels and the impact of fossil fuels on the environment, coal has to be considered impactful for air quality. And so take a look at this little diagram here, which I think is quite interesting. Here's a view across Beijing. On the left is 2008, and on the right is 2013. Same place, 2 different photos, 2 different times. Why did I choose 2008 here? Why is the air so clean in 2008? Something happened in Beijing in 2008.
Oh,
remember?
The Olympics.
The Olympics.
Yeah.
It all disappeared for a month.
Funny, hey, how that happened. Yeah, air quality dramatically improved. Chinese government put incredibly severe restrictions on, they basically shut down construction. So how does construction impact air quality, right? Well, coal is by far the way the most, no, I shouldn't say the most efficient, let me take that back. It's the most cost-effective way of generating heat. And in China, construction is rampant. And so the concrete industry, right? Concrete plants run off coal. It's as simple as that. So they halt all construction. They dramatically reduce the movement of cars and vehicles in and out of Beijing. And what happens? The air quality improves, okay? The Olympics go away and the air quality gets worse, right? Interestingly, in the last few years, let's just say 5 or so years, maybe a little longer than that, China has actually done a remarkable job in terms of improving air quality in its cities, okay? And we'll come back and look at where air quality is worst around the world. And that's all I want to say there, because again, we're going to come back and touch on that. And as we end off our discussion on coal here, before we take our first quick little coffee break, this is one that's much more difficult to quantify, right? The real cost of coal. The real cost of coal, not just environmentally, but in terms of human health, from a mercury, sulfur, and all of these other particulates, okay? And an interesting study done by the Harvard School of Medicine about 5 years ago said that the real cost of coal, when you start costing in to the environment things like acid mine drainage and pollution and acid rain and the cost to human health, the real cost of coal is far greater than just how many cents per kilowatt hour you spend generating electricity from coal, okay? It's a little beyond the scope of this course. We could spend probably a whole lecture talking about the human health aspects of coal, and certainly from an air quality perspective. But yeah, very, very tricky. Okay. Questions? Comments? You probably get a sense that I'm not a fan of coal, right? This is a 19th century technology to boil a pot of water. It's as simple as that. You bring coal in, okay? You burn it, you produce heat, you boil water, create steam, turn a turbine. That's how you generate electricity. Okay? Simple, straightforward, some would say elegant, but very, very expensive environmentally. And that's that's just my bias. I'm not a fan of coal. All right, I tell you what, everybody, why don't we do this? Let's grab a quick pause. Okay, let's pick up and keep going. And I think our timing will work well here this morning. So we have two more of the great fossil fuels to talk about here. And one, of course, is petroleum, and the other is natural gas. So some general comments about petroleum, then I want to look at some of the environmental impacts. Again, so just to be clear, some people use the terms crude oil and petroleum interchangeably. We extract crude oil, and from that we produce a number of petroleum products, right, including jet fuel and all sorts of things that we find petroleum in, from toothpaste to plastic. And so I think it's a bit, certainly it doesn't give a full picture, I think, if you're just talking about petroleum from a transportation fuel perspective, right? So petroleum covers a whole range. And so whilst the 19th century was the age of coal, the 20th century, of course, is very clearly the petroleum age. If we just try and put this into a context quickly, these are the top 10 oil consumers as of the end of 2019. And what I've done here, everybody, as you'll see similar diagrams throughout the book, I've scaled these bubbles relative to one another, right? So in terms of the greatest consumers of oil, so this refers to crude oil, you can see the US is number one at about, something like 20 to 20.5 million barrels per day, right? So we are the largest consumer of oil in the world, as I think probably you would expect. China is second, right? And growing for sure, something like 13 million. And then you can see the others here in this top 10. I don't know, again, if there's anything in here that surprises you. You probably would have been able to argue several of these or predict several of these without even sort of thinking. Okay, so that's in terms of consumption. Now, with regard to oil production and oil consumption, I wanted to spend, there's a diagram in the book, and let me just quickly open it and give you the diagram number here, that it is 3.14. And it's quite a complicated diagram. And so I want to just take it step by step, and I've broken this out as we move through here. So first of all, this is world oil production from 1965, right, through to 2019. And you can see that global oil production is on the rise, continues to rise. There's a few dips here and there, the dip in the 1970s, the oil crisis of the early 1970s. But as of 2019, we are at about 101.6 million barrels per day of oil production, right? That's what the trend is. That's what the trend has been. Now, interestingly, in the late 1980s, a very well-known British geologist by the name of Campbell came out with a prediction that we would reach peak oil, so he called this peak oil, and that we would reach peak oil somewhere around about 2008. And from 2008 onwards, oil production globally would begin to decline, and would begin to decline rapidly, okay? And this became known as peak oil and got a lot of people's attention in the 1990s about when would we potentially run out of oil. His argument was that there were very few new finds out there, and that we were just chronically overpumping our oil supply, right? You can see, well, he wasn't really right, was he? Okay, with this prediction that we would reach peak oil of about 80 million barrels per day. Another very well respected group, a consulting group here in the United States, modified this prediction in the late 2000s and indicated that we would be at about peak oil at about 2030, all right, at which point production would decline. And you could see, you know, even that's not really close. We have blown through both of these predictions, okay? Lost, I think, certainly in Campbell and the CERA reference, is what the predictions for the demand are coming out of Asia, right? It's called the Asia Phoenix demand, and that's essentially South Asia, so India, East Asia, China, Southeast Asia, places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. That whole region where in our population lecture, we said there were more people living inside the circle than outside of it, right? And so the demand is not quite where our current projections are in terms of production, but we're on that trend, right? And the demand in Asia is going to continue to go up. So there's a really interesting sort of interplay here between how much oil are we actually producing and what the various predictions are in terms of when we might run out or what the Asian demand really looks like. I think what we do know, right, is that what we do know, undoubtedly what we know, is that part of this continual increase here that we've seen over the last, 2 decades has been driven by unconventional oil, right? Now remember conventional versus unconventional reservoirs. Conventional oil is where that oil migrates from a source rock into a reservoir and sits there essentially as a pool, and we can pump that out, right? Things like we see in the Gulf of Mexico. Versus unconventional oil, which is oil and natural gas, but in this discussion it's oil, that's held in things like the tar sands that we've already talked about, right? So the unlocking of unconventional reservoirs has been a major player in the increased production of oil. So anything in blue here is conventional reservoirs, and the predictions from Campbell and the predictions from this consulting group CERA did not take into account, because they could not foresee the technology like hydrologic fracking being so widely used, did not see just how much of this unconventional oil we could potentially tap into, right? So oil is a finite resource. It's not a renewable energy source. It's finite, right? It takes millions of years to form. And of course, oil is the transformation of marine organisms over time into crude oil. So we will run out at some point, but we continue to find new discoveries, and we continue to be able to go in to unconventional reservoirs and get more. Of course, this is a global commodity, and the indications are that somewhere by the middle of this century, okay, and these are estimations. We don't quite know exactly where this will be, but somewhere by 2050, when we have this, another 2 to 2.5 billion people on the planet, we're going to need to find about 22 to 25 million barrels per day of new oil, right? So oil is not going away anytime soon. And of course, it's a global commodity in a volatile market. And I've just put on here the price of oil, and you can see just how it fluctuates tremendously. I haven't looked actually. I don't know if anybody looked today, but the price of oil is probably somewhere in the region of $55 to $60 a barrel. And so it's much more profitable to take out. Any thoughts on that? Does that make sense? I just wanted to give you a little bit of a breakdown on the fact that we have not reached peak oil, and it's unlikely that we're going to reach peak oil anytime soon. That's the take-home message here.
I had a question.
How much?
How much oil do we have in reserves to how long can that sustain us just off oil alone?
Okay, so that's a really good question, right? How long can these? So the estimates vary tremendously, right? Because of the unconventional reservoirs, right? So if we took the unconventional reservoirs off the table, right? So if we took Venezuela and Canada and the oil sands off the table, and the predictions are that we've probably got oil somewhere in the region of 30 to 70 years, somewhere in there. depending on whether there's new finds. And of course, you remember that two-dimensional space, right, where you're looking at reserves and resources. The price will drive exactly how much we can take out. But when you overlay the Venezuela and the Canadian oil sands on there, the predictions are that we have oil for probably quite some time to come. And I might, to be honest with you, I can't put a number on that because the estimations vary so much. But it's not going to be within a decade or 3 to 4 decades that we run out of oil. The question is, can we afford, both in terms of dollars and environmentally, to go into these resources that we have in Venezuela and Canada and actually get at them? Does that make sense? That doesn't answer your question. Right? I wish I could give you that we are 63 years away from running out of oil, but I can't answer that. Does that make sense?
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Okay, so just a little bit more context here. These are the top 5 oil producing countries. So blue is the United States, light brown is Russia. Okay, that pink is the former USSR. So you can see the break there from 89 to 91, right? We've got Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Canada. Anything surprise you about this? Top 5 crude oil producing countries. Some people probably don't realize that the US is the highest producer of crude oil in the world. Look at that in 2008, right? We hit the financial crisis in 2008. We're producing about 5 million barrels per day. We are halfway behind what the Russians and Saudi Arabia is producing, right? And then we get 2008 onwards and the US takes off. Why do you think this happens? What's driving this here? What is that? Who's in the industry? Is it Nicholas? I need to look at the... Mary, you're going to answer something, or Nicholas?
Is that when we started importing oil and refining it?
Okay, no, I'm glad you said that. It isn't. That's a really interesting guess.
Hydrofracking.
Yep. So this is the unlocking of the shale boom, right? And especially what has been happening out in West Texas, right? So that's fracking, hydrologic fracking, being able to go in and get these unconventional reservoirs. So that's the shale boom in the United States, where we take off, quite interestingly. Just as we look at US oil production, here's the historical chart going back to the 1980s, right? And here you can see this is in thousands of barrels per day. So 12,000 barrels is 12 million. I don't know why they just don't put million, but that's how the oil industry does it, right? I took this back to the end of January. We're currently at right about 11 million barrels per day, 10,900,000 barrels per day, okay? But quite interesting here, look at 2020, right? Look at, and so gray shows recessions or other big things. Here's COVID. This shows the impact of the pandemic on oil production. We go down below 10 million barrels per day from a high of about 13, okay? And now that's picking back up again. Financial crisis in 2008. All right, and when we just look at the US production by state, okay, here's again this is 1,000 barrels per day, right? So 2,000 barrels per day, that's greater than 2 million. I know they say, you know, everything's bigger and better in Texas, but clearly when it comes to crude oil production, we are leading the way. And that is really driven by, as I said, what's happening out in the Permian, right? So we're in energy state, absolutely critical. And the final sort of contextual diagram I wanted to show you was this one. And this is just fascinating to me, right? This shows US petroleum consumption, production, imports, exports, and net imports, right? So this is a busy little diagram, but this is just really cool. So let me try and get a color that won't clash here too badly. Yeah, we'll choose this one here. So let's start at the blue line. This blue line shows consumption, right? So that's US oil consumption, okay? You can see the oil crisis of the 1970s, it goes down. You can see here the financial crisis of 2008, it goes down. We haven't seen the impact of COVID here because it doesn't include 2020, right? But my guess is we're going to see something like that happen. So the blue is consumption, okay? This brown line here is production, right? Here's the shale boom. there's production. So that's interesting. Okay, Mary, your comment about imports, this is the green line, right? Imports are total imports in millions of barrels per day. So here we're just importing, and our imports start dropping post 2008. Why? Because our domestic production goes up dramatically post 2008, right? So green is imports, yellow is exports, and this red line here, this one here is net imports. In other words, it's our imports minus our exports. Now, someone have a stab at explaining to me what's going on here. The US is both an importer, you can see that in green, we're importing something like 9.5 million barrels per day. We're an exporter, we're exporting about 8.5 to 9 million barrels per day. How can that be? What's going on? What explains that? What do you think? And if those two numbers were exactly the same, then our net imports here would be zero. We are almost at, it'll be interesting to see what 2020 looks like. Of course, COVID's really going to blur the picture, but we are almost at a net import of zero.
Didn't we become energy independent with Donald Trump was president? Is that why our exports are higher than our imports? No, I mean, I hear what you're saying here. That's been independent of the administration. But keep going, Jed. Think about. Yeah, I don't know. I'll if I think of anything, I'll
okay.
Say it.
Yeah. And the reason, so the reason I make that comment of independent of administration, so here we are, 2016. 2016 is right about there, right? There is the election of there's the Trump administration, and here 2008 to 2016, there's the Obama administration, and then we can keep going back. There's the Bush administration and so on. So that net import starts dropping just in the early parts of President Bush's second term. Kind of interesting.
Does that have anything to do with war?
No. So we have the shale boom, we start producing more, right? Remember, the US has some of, if not the most sophisticated refineries in the world, right? And where's this import coming from? This import is coming largely from Canada, right? Remember that? Yeah, we've got some Saudi Arabia in there as well, and we've got Venezuela, and we've got Mexico, right? The majority of our imports is this heavy crude, right? Remember, we look at crude oil depending on its sulfur concentration, right? How sweet, so we talk about sweet crude and sour crude and how heavy it is, what the impurities are in it, right? We import a lot of heavy crude. We refine it, and then we export it, okay, as petroleum products. So that's why the US is a net exporter, because we're able to take all of this heavy crude, refine it into petroleum products, and export it, okay? And you can see that as we start producing more through the shale boom, and we are exporting more, right? That yellow line starts going up dramatically, okay? So this is kind of like a double win for the oil industry, right? We're discovering more, we're producing more, and then we're refining more and exporting more. I don't know, the last decade has been fascinating from an oil perspective. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so it is at the end of the day an environmental cause, right? So what is the concern? So there's obviously a number of concerns here when it comes to the use of oil. Let's just set the atmospherics aside, because we're going to come back and look at that air pollution and so on. But here's one, right? I'm sure many of you have heard about the Keystone Pipeline, okay? So let's just look at the Keystone Pipeline for a second. Anybody want to have a stab at why Keystone has been so controversial? and in particular, something that's known as Keystone XL. Anybody up on that?
Well, I know one reason why it's controversial is that it runs through a lot of native lands.
Okay.
And then it is extremely large. And it runs through a lot of native area, and the potential like toxic, kind of waste that could go into these communities is extreme, and could severely affect the health of people, because pipelines tend to break at some point, and the potential for this pipeline breaking could be devastating to certain communities.
Okay. I agree. Is the flip side of that argument, Jacob, isn't the flip side of that pipelines is the safest way to transport oil?
Yeah, for sure. I know that was just one of the potential concerns, especially with it running through land that is important to the culture and the spirituality of the Native Americans, and how they have a very close association with the land and their culture.
So I'm glad you raised that, because I think that's quite often overlooked in this argument. I remember I was at a water conference in Kansas 3 years ago, and I met two farmers, one from Western Kansas and one from Eastern Kansas, and both were members of First Nations tribes, and they said exactly that thing, right? They said, we don't want oil pipelines crossing our land. What we really want is water pipelines, right? Bring in that excess water from the northeast of the country so we can actually farm more. But anyway, that's an aside. So I agree with that. And when you look at the Keystone, so the map on the right here shows the Keystone projects in these various phases. And just so you're all aware, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are all built. That's all part of the Keystone pipeline, bringing in oil from the Canadian oil sands, right? From the Athabasca oil sands in Alberta. And so the red line is the line that pumps it across from Alberta, across Saskatchewan into Manitoba, and then straight down south through North and South Dakota. Some of that goes out into Pennsylvania and Illinois, into the Patoka and Wood River refineries, and then the rest comes down to the Gulf of Mexico. So that's already there and transports about 600,000 or so barrels per day. Keystone XL, which has been really at the forefront of kind of the environmental lobby for at least a decade, and probably something like 15 years now, depending on the administration. And if we're just transparent, we just got to, not revise history, but just tell it is what it is. That's phase 4. Keystone XL is phase 4, which is the blue proposed line. And the proposal there was to add a second pipeline to double the transportation capacity from about 600,000 to at least 1.5 million barrels per day coming down Keystone. The blue proposal was to cut across Montana, but a little bit of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Kansas and Nebraska, to get it into Steel City and then bring it down to the Gulf of Mexico, right? So the Canadian Pipeline Company, the Canadian government, the Alberta government were all on board with this. Then you started seeing the environmental backlash. Part of it was with reference to Jacob's point here, right? It was crossing native lands. And so there were a lot of environmental lawsuits against that. Part of it was the scare surrounding spill. Part of it was the environmental lobby saying, do we really need this oil? Do we need to go in and keep scraping oil out of the Canadian tundra, which has a whole series of environmental impacts there, and get that oil down to the Gulf of Mexico? When in fact, and this is just my 2 cents, when in fact we've got all of this oil sitting in West Texas anyway, right? Why are we building this extra pipeline that has all of this possible environmental impacts? And so it was really interesting seeing how this was put on the sidetrack by the Obama administration, who eventually in 2011 said, we're done with this. We're not building Keystone XL. We're not building the blue phase. Then President Trump is elected, and he said, no, absolutely, we're building this because it's going to produce all these jobs and will reduce our dependence on foreign oil. And then President Biden gets elected, and he says, no, we're not building this. This is off. Okay, so it's really become a ping pong ball of going backwards and forwards between we're building it, we're not building it, we're building it, we're not building it. And so construction just started on the Montana border here of XL. And now it's off again, right? Because we have a new administration. Now, whether you support that or are against that from an administration perspective is in many ways neither here nor there. The reality for me is, and you can probably sense where I'm coming from as an environmental person, I really question whether we would need this pipeline, given the fact that it's just bringing dirty oil in from Canada, when if we're going to go the oil route, why not just keep exploration going in West Texas? But that's just my 2 cents. This is why, for me, tar sands are so problematic, and for the environmental lobby, right? Extracting oil from tar sands, some of it you can get from deep mining, right? So here is, the bitumen is this kind of thick, black, sticky, tarry, oily substance, and the photographs at the bottom will show this. This is what the tar sands look like if you scoop them up in your hands, right? It's black, sticky sand. The oil is in the tiny pore spaces. This is a scanning electron microscope image of that. These little black nodules are the oil itself, and here's just an image of surface pipeline. The bottom line is you have to put in water under enormous pressure, in other words, turn it into steam. So you've got to heat water, produce steam, inject that steam into the tar sands to then liquefy it and extract it. It's essentially hydraulic fracturing. 20% of Canada's tar sands you can get from surface mining. 80% of them you have to drill down and extract out, right? And the economics of this, let alone the environmental, is problematic, right? Many would argue, well, why are we using a fossil fuel like natural gas to boil water, to then create steam, to then get a fossil fuel out that's dirty, that we may or may not need, right? There's a very circular argument here from an environmental perspective, right? From an industry perspective, obviously the Alberta government wants this to happen. Just some photographs so you can get a sense of the scale of tar sand mining. So this is the strip mining of tar sands in Canada. Of course, this is all in Alberta. And what you're doing is you're removing wetlands and tundra, but that's a whole another issue. But here you've got the tar sands, the dirty sands are about 30 meters deep, and they're scraping away all of the surface material to get to the tar sands. This is the Albion pit in Fort Mackay in Alberta. This is what it looks like, right? So, not an especially attractive landscape once you start scraping away all of these wetlands and tundra to get to the oil. Here's strip mining, again, Fort McMurray. These are not my pictures. This is from the National Geographic. So here is the tundra, okay? And then they mark out the lines with the cars go up and down, the trucks go up and down, and then you just scrape that all away to get to the tar sands that you've then got to process to get the oil. The scale of this, folks, is pretty large. This is a portion of a strip mine northeast of Edmonton, Alberta. So all of this light area here is area that's been scraped away, these forests and wetlands. And I've superimposed on here the outline of the size of Washington, DC, right? So take away the transportation issue, take away Jacob's really good point about pipelines crossing native lands. The on-site impacts the environmental lobby would argue would be horrific. And then, of course, there's the issue of spills, not just spills along transportation networks, but spills in the ocean, right? This is obviously, I think the most devastating aspect of transporting crude oil, and it is what it is. It's part of the risk we take when we're moving fuels around the planet. The good news, I think, is that the oil industry, and especially the tanker industry, has actually done a remarkably good job in reducing the number of spills worldwide. So what I've plotted here by decades, going up to 2019, is the number of what is considered large spills. In other words, spills that are greater than 5,000 barrels going into the ocean, right? So it's just the number of spills are the blue vertical lines. And then the horizontal red lines with the diamonds is the decadal average that I put on there. So you can see in the 1970s, there were on average about 25 spills per decade. Now we're down to less than 5, okay? So the tanker industry itself has done, I think, a very, very good job. And a large part of that is due to the fact that oil tankers are now double hulls, right? So they have to build these tankers with two hulls. So if there's any perforation or damage to an outer hull, the oil just doesn't gush into the sea. Nonetheless, we still see oil spilled every year worldwide. Some of them are catastrophic. So here's a big one in 2018, the Sanxi, about 800,000 barrels. Some of them are much smaller spills on a day-to-day basis. So that's a real issue. And then, of course, just coming closer to home, the last big one we had here in the US close to home was Deepwater Horizon, right? So this was 2010, April, May, June 2010, when there was a wellhead that burst on the BP platform. I think 11 lives were lost, and there was a large amount of oil that was spilled into the Gulf. So this is a diagram that I put here. This little cartoon that I've done at the top here is taken from a number of satellite images, and I just drew the cumulative extent of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. This, of course, led to a $20 billion lawsuit that BP had to pay for cleanup along the Gulf and the fishing and the shrimping industry. I don't know if anybody has got any questions on spills or the Deepwater Horizon in particular. So there are, of course, environmental impacts, right? We have this, in many ways, marvelous substance that we use every day, not just in our vehicles. We produce petroleum products. The downside, of course, is that we have to transport it, and that comes with risks. So like coal, oil is here to stay. This is a diagram. I need to update this for the last 2 years. It'll be interesting to see how COVID has played out in this. But this shows the annual miles traveled in the US in trillions of miles, right? This is how far we drive. Is the financial crisis of 2008. And you can see that this has gone steadily up and continues to go up. And worldwide, this is continuing to go up, right? So just like coal, where we're trying to wean ourselves off from coal, and the industry is taking care of that, the economics are taking care of that. You know, this curve is not going to do this anytime soon. We're not going to see that happen anytime soon, right? We are going to continue to drive. And the question here is, as we continue to drive, what percentage of these miles are going to flip over to electric and what are going to stay oil? Many car companies are now going all electric. So maybe we can have a short discussion on electric vehicles. I don't know, but any thoughts or comments or questions on oil, folks? I know some of you are in the industry, so let's have at it. Any thoughts or comments? Any of you drive a hybrid or an electric vehicle, just as a matter of interest? Nobody. Me neither. Any other thoughts? Okay.
Do you think so there's always this talk about like we need to, go to more of a hybrid vehicle or electric vehicles, but wouldn't it make more sense if there was more of a natural push for public transportation to be used? Wouldn't that have a deeper impact than trying to individually have the compound effect of trying to individually convince people to do electrical vehicles?
So great question, right? I think in the short term, absolutely. Because the reality of saying by January the 1st, 2022, everybody in the US will go electric, it's not going to happen. One, we don't have the infrastructure yet to do that, right? And two, the last time I looked, the price of the Tesla, was pretty up there. Right? I know several family members who have them. And if you want a nice Tesla S, Model S, P95 or whatever it is, you're probably in for 80 to 100,000. So public transportation is key, man. So why don't we do that? Why does public transportation in the southern US not look like what it is in Toronto, Canada, for example, or even New York?
I think the layout of cities being as large as they are has a huge factor into it. But I also think that there's like a stigma that's attached with public transportation in the South. That if it's more of a value in the South to have your own vehicle to be able to drive yourself everywhere than it is like in the Northeast, where it's like it makes no sense to have a vehicle because you can get anywhere you want through public transportation.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I never had any. I used public transportation in Toronto because it was there. They had a wonderful subway system. There was no stigma attached to it. I saw people in business suits going down to the equivalent of Wall Street in Toronto, near my university. There was no stigma attached to it, right? Whereas here, the infrastructure in Fort Worth, the I think the Fort Worth T is doing its best it can, and they're using natural, you see cleaner burning natural gas on the side of it. Yeah, public transport is key, that there seems to be a resistance to it and an infrastructure issue to it. I don't know if anybody feels the same way, but I totally agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, definitely. I've grown up in Fort Worth my whole life. Public transportation has never been very widely used or very widely available. And if you just think about like New York, like the subway, if you've ever been on the subway in New York,
yeah,
it's crazy. You're packed in there with a bunch of people, thousands and thousands of people use that to commute every day. And I mean, the streets are still packed with cars and taxis, but public transportation is huge there. And I feel like Texas definitely has the ability to create that public transportation infrastructure. Like we have the train that runs from Fort Worth to Dallas. I took that to go to the Mavs playoff games, but that's pretty much it. There's not much public busing or anything.
Yeah, and it's an inconvenience, right? In some sense, you got to get to the station, and there's all of that. No, I agree. I completely agree.
It was a bit of a very big culture shock when I played in New York, having to learn how to use public transportation versus like I actually left my vehicle at home for 8 months because there was no point to even take my truck because it was not going to work and it was going to be way more expensive. So to like go through it and then come back, it's like it's like almost two different worlds.
Right. No, it really is. It is two different worlds, right? When I moved to Fort Worth and I got out on those highways for the first time, first of all, I could not believe the size of the truck. I was like, you got to be kidding me, like they're just gigantic, But yeah, everybody has a car here, and that's just the way it is. I don't know if anybody in the class here has been to Singapore. Has anybody been to Singapore? Yeah, so they have an interesting way of dealing with vehicles and incentivizing people to use public transportation. Does anybody know what it is? Okay, so see what you think of this. To own a car in Singapore, which I know is a city-state, but to own a car, it doesn't matter if you want to own a Honda Civic or a Bentley GTC convertible. To own a car, you've got to have a permit, and that permit is $70,000. Cool. Okay, so you go, okay, wait a minute. That's before I buy the car. $70,000 to have the right to own a car. And then the cost of a car there is absolutely astronomical, right? So for example, I used to have a pre-owned, I had a little BMW convertible, 335i. I loved a little Beamer, and I bought it secondhand, and it was great. And I think, what are those new 335i's? $55,000, $60,000, something like that. The exact same vehicle in Singapore was $335,000 US. Add the $70,000 permit, so you're at $410,000 US to own a car in Singapore. That makes you think, right? It gets you to stop.
You couldn't have just exported your car.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I needed a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit. Now you still see lots of fabulous cars, and it was crazy because there's a lot of money there. I know that's an extreme example, right? Where very few places are going to be Singapore. But coming back to Matt's point, I think is well taken, right? And that is that it seems like we're trying here. You see the bike program, but gosh, it's hard to get people to change that, that flip. And then of course, the electrification, all going to electric vehicles. And are electric vehicles that much greener than than traditional vehicles? There's a lot of debate around that in terms of, well, what happens to the batteries down the line, and where are those charging stations getting their electricity from? In a place like Texas, where 20% of your electricity comes from wind, there's a chunk of that's being generated by wind, but in other parts of the US, it's not, right? So it's complicated, not easy and straightforward. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on oil? This remarkable substance that we just go to a gas station, fill up our car, drive, and we magically do it all again a week or two down the line, right? We haven't really come up with a viable alternative. Although I don't know, maybe I don't know what your sense is, everybody, but maybe we're starting to see a real shift here towards EVs, both hybrids, but also EVs in a much bigger way. I know the two vehicles that my wife and I drive, both companies have said one has said by 2025, everything's going to be electric, and the other one by 2030, everything's going to be electric. So it'll be interesting to see.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Doesn't it cost more money to like mine the lithium, and it's worse for the environment to do all that for batteries than it is just to stick with oil right now and just burn it off like normal?
So that's a really interesting question, Jet, because I don't know if the verdict, it's hard to really say, right? And we'll talk a little bit about this when we get to look at renewables. The same with solar panels, right? When you're building a solar panel, a thin film PV solar panel, and that technology, you need rare earth materials. Well, where do those come from? Well, you got to mine them, and we talk about the life cycle impact, or the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of a technology, right? So you look at oil, and you look at producing lithium batteries, and it's very hard, I think, to get. I haven't actually found this, to be totally honest with you, Jet, to get a truly objective like-for-like comparison here, which is better. I mean, if you're gonna drill for oil, oil has a large carbon footprint, period. It does. And I don't drive an electric vehicle, right? I drive a gasoline vehicle. And so oil has a large carbon footprint. Do e-vehicles emit anything? Well, no, they don't, right? We know that. But from a life cycle perspective, how does that play out? Currently at the scale, and this is just my guess, Jet, so please don't take this as any definitive scientific statement. So currently, my guess is that at the scale that we have electric vehicles, that the life cycle footprint of EVs is still significantly smaller than conventional vehicles. And it has to be just given the sheer numbers on the road. But how does that change over time? I don't know. It's a really good question, to be honest. I just don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I just watched a video one time where it was comparing like the mining of lithium and then how long it takes to decompose with wind energy, and like how expensive it is to produce the windmill blades and like how their lifespan and all that. And it like came to the conclusion that oil currently is better for the environment than it would be to like completely switch to electric. Yeah, for the time being.
For the time being, yeah. And so 20 years ago, that argument would have held true for wind from an electricity perspective. The same thing would have held true, right? Wind farms could not be constructed at a competitive price next to natural gas or coal because of the cost involved. Now, so the oil industry would say, well, we should not go renewable because it's too expensive. The renewable industry said, well, oil and coal and natural gas are heavily subsidized anyway, and they go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Now the reality, the straightforward economics, is that wind turbines are absolutely on parity with natural gas and coal, even if you take the environmental costs associated with this off the table. And I can tell you this firsthand because a very good friend of mine is a CEO of a very, very large energy company. And he said to me, Mike, our company is not a non-profit, right? We are in this to deliver electricity, and we are a for-profit company. We're a large utility company. And that's why they were switching to natural gas and to wind as their 1-2 complement. But Jet, I take your point. I think one has to be open to looking at the research, but also asking where that research is coming from, who's funding that research, where is this information coming out? Because again, depending on your sources, you'll get a particular viewpoint. And in today's communication environment, it's hard to be objective, but I take your point for sure. Anything else, everybody? Okay, well, we have 5 minutes left, so I am not going to get to natural gas. We will do that tomorrow. But I do want to let's see, where is, I do want to just touch on this. Okay, so very briefly, everyone, I put up a link on a review for the exam, and I'm going to touch on this a little more tomorrow, okay? So in that short review, it's a 10-minute video. I talked a little bit about the multiple choice and the written answers, but right now, just for the next minute or two, let me refer to the study guide that I also put up, right? Did everybody see this? Or it should be on there, right? So the study guide there is under content review. Thanks, Matt. My study guides like this one, this is not an exhaustive, you know, here are the questions that are going to be on the exam. I like to say, these are the key things that you need to focus on, right? Yeah, I need you to be able to explain what the Anthropocene is, what the Great Acceleration is, the basic premise of the scientific method, right? What's the difference between a hypothesis, a theory, and the law? What I put on these study guides are the big concepts, the big terms, the big things you need to be able to explain. What is an age structure diagram? What do they mean? How do they work, right? The human dependency on land, that curve that looked at population and the land per capita, things like that. What I've got at the bottom here, this is not complete. So I've just got here from a nuclear perspective, the front end and the back end of the nuclear cycle. I'm going to add to the study guide once we get through tomorrow. Now, I know the exam is on Wednesday, right? But what I will do is I'm going to put a couple of more points on this as it relates to the nuclear cycle. And my guess is, everybody, for the exam, because we're running just a little bit behind here, and I'm comfortable with that because I much prefer questions and conversation. We will more than likely take the exam up to the end of nuclear, and we will do renewables as part of the second exam. Right? Let's just see how tomorrow goes, because I've still got to talk about natural gas, and we've still got to cover nuclear. And I still want to talk a little bit about the exam and open up the Zoom link tomorrow for Q&A as well. I don't want to just rush through this and force topics in just to stick to some schedule, right? So my assumption at the moment is that the exam is going to cover everything up to and including what we cover with nuclear energy tomorrow. Then we'll do the exam and come back and do renewables as one lecture, okay? So questions? Questions on that? Let me stop the recording for